Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Comms Coffee Club, episode 5. I'm your host, Max Forsyth, and delighted this week to bring you the wonderful Madeleine Little, who is the founder of Dawn Communications, but previously led communications globally for Dun and Bradstreet, Aon, JLL, and before that, she worked agency side at Citigate, where her first ever job involved walking into a meeting room and working on the IPO of Orange Mobile back in the day, a long time ago now. But yeah, her career is fascinating. It's taken her all across the world, from London to Singapore, to working with the Americas. And yeah, we get stuck into the weeds of all things comms, her favourite CEO to work for, and what the future of communications holds, and what she would change if she could. So yeah, looking forward to this episode. I hope you like it. If you do, please like and subscribe on YouTube, or follow us on your favourite podcast platform, and look forward to bringing you more content soon. So, Madeleine Little, welcome to the Comms Coffee Club podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Max.
Not a problem, pleasure. And how's your week going? I know it's a sort of Thursday afternoon when we're filming, so yeah, kind of tell us all what you've been up to.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been busy. I can't quite believe it's Thursday, actually. I've just been really focusing on pulling together the programs that I'm offering clients, really sort of looking at the detail of that, which has been it's actually been really good fun. I think I posted a video, I think yesterday on it. I'm just really enjoying it. I'm kind of almost back to basics and remembering what I love doing. So that's been great.
Nice, super. And we'll come back to what you're doing now later on, but let's wind the clock all the way back. How did you get into communications?
A long way back, yes. So I think, like quite a lot of people in the industry, I kind of fell into it a little bit by accident. Not completely by accident, but it certainly wasn't a big game plan for me. I'd graduated and I had worked a couple of years in a research company, focusing on French markets. So really upped my French, which had gone from university French to business French. I then got a job at the London Stock Exchange and was it was the worst move ever. I was so bored. It wasn't me. So I was desperate to move.
And what were you doing there? Was it not a comms role, I'm assuming?
No, it wasn't. I'm like, what was I doing there? It was a lot to do with numbers, data. The closest I got to anything with media, I think, was I used to have to send data to the Financial Times on a weekly basis.
Got it.
And it was, it was a lovely group of people, but it just wasn't right for me. Yeah. So I spotted an ad in the Financial Times for Citigate Dewe Rogerson, so big financial city PR agency. And this was in the hard copy newspaper on a Thursday. That's how long ago it was. And it was a tiny little ad, but it caught my eye, looking for people who had language skills and sort of finance city experience. And I kind of thought, well, that's me. I applied, and I don't think I truly knew what I was applying for, to be honest, now that I look at it. But I got the job and joined the international team there. So focusing very much on French clients and the French market. And was there for 3 years, and that was my real intro into communications. And it was, it was quite sort of, now that I look back, it was a very steep learning curve, but so interesting. And we were very focused on IPOs, M&As, that kind of thing. Lots of ex-national journalists, working there. So people to learn from. Right. So it was great. And then I made the move in-house to JLL after going traveling for a bit, and started actually as a contractor, which I think is a really interesting and good way for people to potentially move, roles and into new companies, because you get to interview them and they get to interview you, and you can really see if it's a good fit.
Yes, although at what would have been a relatively sort of junior age and junior part of your career,
Mm.
often a lot of contractors, particularly in communications, tend to go the other way around. So it tends to be something people do when they're a bit more experienced, and yeah. So yeah, kind of what was that like going in? And
Yeah, actually, you're right. I mean, it was quite. I can't even remember how I found it either, but I feel like it was fate. Um, as we sort of 3 months passed, and I think all sides involved decided it was a good fit. So
yes,
I went on to stay for 12 years. So it was definitely the right move. And I think it was really interesting because that's a very different environment to being agency side. Um,
yes,
obviously, and really focusing just on one sector, so real estate, and really focused in on PR and media relations back then. But I
mm,
guess
mm,
because you're sector focused, really starting to understand the value of trade media and how that works, and building
yes,
relationships there, that kind of thing. And real estate then and now has a very strong trade media. So I
mm,
think I built a lot more experience and knowledge during that
yes.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the biggest? Yeah, because you talk about the quite clear changes and differences between agency and in-house. What was the biggest shock for you going from that agency environment in-house?
Um, I think really getting to know stakeholders, I suppose, because when you're agency and quite junior, you're not really the one who's always that close to the client. You're kind of there in the background, taking orders from the more senior client facing people, certainly back
Mm,
then, kind of
mm,
getting the work done.
mm,
And then suddenly you find yourself in house and sort of business partnering with different, parts of the business and quite senior
yes.
people. So I think that's great experience. I think that really sort of gets you to up your game and learn how to deal with different types of stakeholders, kind of, some who maybe are more tricky. And I think also I
Mm,
do remember back then, the agency side, we worked really hard, and there was no sort of, you would never push back on it. You just got on with it. So very late
yeah.
nights, all nighters over the weekend. It was the nature, I guess, of the work when it was sort of IPOs and M&A, but suddenly in-house felt a little bit more
Mm,
sort of steady.
mm. Yeah, and
Still
just
has
thinking
its
about the IPO and M&A work agency side back then, I guess at a relatively junior level, what did that literally look like? What were you doing on those late nights?
So actually, my first project was the IPO of Orange, the mobile phone
Oh,
company.
wow. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
The France Telecom had bought and then decided to IPO. And I mean, I think my first day in the office, I went to a meeting with a lot of people in it, and my boss was traveling, so I hadn't met her yet. Well, I had interviewing, but she wasn't there.
Yes.
And I remember sitting in the meeting and just thinking, and they were using project code names, so I didn't know who the
Got
companies
it.
were. I didn't know. I was literally so in at the deep end. It's just makes me laugh looking back. But for that was a really huge project, and I ended up running all of the websites. So
Mhm.
um, it was a retail offer in across 4 countries in Europe. So we had to have these
Wow.
huge IPO websites in different languages. You can imagine it was kind of, you know, having to have everything checked by legal to sort of down to the last, crossing every T, dotting every I. So it was really detailed work. So that was actually the first thing. But then you'd sort of be
Yes.
involved on this sort of when it came to launch, the media side, and sort of supporting directors on that side of things as well.
Yeah. Wow. That must have been quite something. And I think, for someone like myself who, you know, yeah, who wasn't in the workforce at that time, I probably take for granted uh, just how easy and quick it is to even things like be able to update website copy and get all of that sorted. I can't imagine with the stress and pressure of the deadlines anyway, but then doing what we take and think is very easy and quick stuff now was not nearly as quick or as easy back then.
That is so true, and it makes me think. And the irony, that it's a mobile phone company that I was working for. Um, because at the time I think we had Nokia phones that would make calls and send texts, and that was probably also why we were spending so much time in the office, because there just wasn't the opportunity to work in the same way that we can now. And Blackberries didn't even exist then, but there was a lot of talk, obviously meetings with the clients, a lot of talk about Blackberries and how we were going to be able to be on the internet. And I do remember thinking, how is that really going to happen? I can't imagine that. Which is just crazy when you look at things now and where we are and how we can work and be mobile and do things quickly. It makes
Oh,
me feel very old.
yeah, well, yeah. Although, yeah, I mean, I can remember my first mobile. Yeah, it was a Nokia 3310, and the most exciting thing about it was being able to play Snake. You know, and then you think how far we've come now with all of our stuff. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, so then you moved into JLL real estate.
Mm.
So you went kind of temp to perm, and then yeah, kind of you were there for quite a while, but also that job took you around the world as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I I was heading up the team for the UK and EMEA, and then it was 2011, got the opportunity to move to look after external comms for the Asia Pacific region,
Yes.
based in Singapore. And yeah, it was, at the time I was a little bit hesitant. I think you just can be. Sometimes you think, oh my goodness, that's huge. And how will that work? Moving my life to the other side of the world. I don't really know anyone, sort of finding all these reasons to not do it. And it was
Yes.
actually it was the lady who I met up with just last week, actually, Nicole Worthington, who was at JLL for a long time and out there and persuaded me and kind of, she's very persuasive, persuaded me it would be a great idea. And also my late dad, who at the time just sort of said, why are you even hesitating? It's like, what is the worst that can happen? You've just got to grab opportunities. And he's sort of like,
Yes.
if it all goes wrong, if everybody's horrible, the job's terrible, it's absolutely awful, it's a disaster, you can
Yes.
just come back and get another job. And I was kind of like, oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
So he sort of gave me the kind of final push to just go for it. And I was there for 3.5 years, and it was a really, really great experience. It was so interesting. I think when you've been in the UK and Europe and working a lot
Mm.
with colleagues in the US,
Yes.
just the culture and at that time, so it's 2011, the markets, everything about it felt really sort of exciting, innovative, fast paced. Just
Mm.
there was just such a sort of buzz around, and I think definitely in real estate, obviously at the time, but I think probably in other sectors as well. It was just a real sort of can do attitude, which certainly when I look back, perhaps, it didn't really feel like that all the time in the UK and
Mm.
with really established European markets. So it was great. It was refreshing.
Yeah, no, nice. And yeah, so stationed out in Singapore, but then did you have responsibility for the whole Asia region?
Yeah, I did. So it was at the time, I think it was about 16 markets. So that was sort of in across to India, sort of up to China, Japan, all of
Yes.
Southeast Asia, Australia and New Zealand. So a really diverse, big
Mm.
region. Yeah.
Yes. And tell us, what is comms like in that part of the world compared to the UK, Europe, US?
Um, I think there are a lot of similarities, but then I think when you get down to that individual market level, things can be quite different. Just the way, people work with media and expectations, and it's such a diverse region. On the one hand, you've got Australia and New Zealand that you could compare much more directly with, the UK and Western Europe markets, well, Europe overall, and the US. And then, you had China, where, totally different media landscape, obviously,
Yes.
very unique. India, again, totally different. Just a huge media sort of landscape there. It's enormous. And,
Yes.
People are very interested they just love information, it seems. That sort of was my experience. So it's trying to sort of sift through all of that. And then things like going, Japan I remember the first time I went there and visited, they still had these kind of, the sector journalists would go and work all together in sort of press offices that were within sort of the government departments. So there was sort of one for real estate, and there was still actually pigeonholes, like physical pigeonholes that companies would put their press releases into. And that must have been like 2012, 13. And you just think,
what?
It was
Wow.
it was so interesting.
Okay.
It was totally unexpected.
Really interesting.
And there's that sort of formality. So I think a lot of principles are applicable wherever you are. And obviously working for a global company, that's what you're really looking to do. You're looking to create that sort of consistent approach and standards, processes, etc. Obviously messaging, and being able to adapt it for each market, and sort of taking those local differences and nuances into account. So trying to work with people to do that.
Yes, of course. So then after Singapore, back to London with JLL? Right.
Yes, that's right. Into a global role, actually, because I'd kicked off a project when I was in Asia around, back then we called it brand journalism, but so basically owned content. So I came back to London and I was really focused on running that side of things for JLL. So that's owned, created content. And also did a lot, actually, for some reason became the person who did a lot with the World Economic Forum, because JLL was a strategic partner.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you mentioned the content piece. Even in the 7 years that I've done this job, the explosion. But I'd even say you look at any communications brief now, and I would compare it to a job description from 7 years ago. Content, sort of the earned media piece is right up there on job descriptions now. And it wasn't so much when I started. I think it really dominates, particularly in broader sort of B2B markets. It's content is almost external communications now. They're interchangeable, aren't they?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think back when we all it started to become a thing, and everyone was becoming aware of it and thinking, oh, what is this thing? And we should be doing it. Certainly my experience was that it fell into the remit of what was then PR. And I don't know, I think it was just something that happened. I don't know why that was. My guess is because I think the PR teams were seen as people who were could write well and could tell stories. So it kind of felt like a fit, whereas perhaps our marketing colleagues were seen more as kind of, I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to insult anybody, but certainly my experience.
Really good at building campaigns on HubSpot.
Exactly. Maybe it's that. But now, and I think now that's, and I'm sure you will see it doing what you do. I think it's so interesting because it almost feels like I guess it depends on the company, what they decide to put into that external comms remit. And I think there's a lot of grey areas, and that whole sort of marketing communications alignment and integration. I mean, we could have a whole hour's discussion just on that and not come up with a solution.
Yeah,
It's
it's in I think from my perspective, it's in my view would be it's in transition. Um, I look at we talk about content. Look at social media. When I started, social media was in marketing. No,
mm,
was that sort of within the communications team, or it was sat with digital with the website guys, but they were more closely aligned to IT, so that was always a bit contentious. But I think certainly most B2B clients that I know, content and social media has started to move across into the communications team. What that hasn't been backed up by necessarily is it hasn't been reflected in terms of headcount and budget. Just going to say that.
mm,
There are still very kind of very sort of public knowledge. It wouldn't take anybody long to go on LinkedIn and look at a lot of large organizations and stick in marketing sort of job titles versus communications job titles, and you can see the enormous difference in the size of the teams, and that is still there. It'll be interesting to see whether that changes. I think one thing I have noticed with marketing is it's seemingly becoming a lot more closely, certainly visibly aligned with sales, and a lot of the data and strategy behind the sales piece and the sales funnel, and a
yes.
lot more of the creative elements are moving across to communications. But still, yet to be seen in terms of budget and headcounts. But it should work itself out. But hey, it's also not a particularly inviting environment in the UK at the moment to be making those large investments. So I think we're kind of in the transition phase where everyone is sort of jostling for position a little bit, and no one's quite willing to put the money where their mouth is, if I can say.
No, that's so interesting, and I agree. I think the main thing for any company though to think about is just to be clear, because there's no absolutely correct way, like this is the only way to do it and to structure it. I think people come unstuck and teams get fed up, and it just gets frustrating when there's a bit of a lack of clarity over who actually owns what, and maybe a few people are trying to own something, or it's falling through the gaps because everyone thinks someone else is doing it, or there's just not that clarity and structure. And I think there are various ways you can get it, I suppose, and it depends on the resource, the budget, the priorities, the skill sets. It's just so many. I think that's what makes it really tough, is that there's no one size fits all. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think perhaps that also sometimes slightly feeds into. I'm certainly of the opinion that communications is a fairly transient function and skill set, and people can very competently move about sectors, but often I can honestly count on one hand the amount of times as a recruiter that I've had a brief where a client has said to me, I don't want someone from our industry, because they don't want to confront anything that might upset the apple cart, or how things are structured, or how, and do things differently. It's very interesting. Honestly, I can count, probably less than 5 times I've had that. Which is, when you think about communications itself, is quite transient, but clients, on the other hand, don't want that. It's
I've had that experience, but at the same time, I did hear of something recently, and it was a B2B company, and they actually decided to go with someone who had a B2C background, and they deliberately made that choice and that decision because they wanted to inject that kind of different perspective in. So I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
mean,
changed.
Citibank did it.
Mm,
Yes, and Citibank in the UK made a very deliberate decision. I think you look at a lot of their communications team. A lot of them are now from broader sort of consumer backgrounds in retail and supermarkets, etc., rather than from a sort of financial services. So
mm.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's rarer rather than the norm. So JLL. So you've done, how many years at JLL did you do in total?
It was 12 years. It was 12
12
years, but
years.
it didn't feel,
Yeah.
I think, because of having, when you have the opportunity to, well, to progress in your career, to take on more responsibility, and then obviously moving regions, and just working on, really different, interesting projects, and it's such a huge business. So, but yeah, I kind of got to the point where I was thinking, you'll cut me in half and there'll be the logo through me. So it's probably time to make a change. And so made the decision to move to Aon. So different. So then I guess maybe I'm bucking the trend there because they were
Yeah, yeah,
willing to
yeah.
hire me, even though I'd not. I mean, I did have city experience, I suppose, from way back when, but not specifically kind of risk management or sort of insurance, reinsurance.
Yeah. And
Um,
what was that like, going from real estate into that market?
um, there are a lot of similarities in terms of the company sizes, both listed on New York, both actually headquartered big presences headquartered in Chicago in the same building, as it turned out. So it's
Okay.
kind of, I
Yeah.
went over to in the Aon Centre in Chicago, and I went to meet new colleagues soon after I joined, then was able to also have coffees with colleagues from JLL that I just left. So that was kind of
Oh
nice.
wow. So JLL don't have their own JLL towers in Chicago.
No, they don't typically own their own buildings. They would lease
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
So yeah, and I joined Aon to head up external comms, sort of across the EMEA region. And I joined 2016, and then I think it was probably around 2017. Was asked to step in and start working and heading up the internal comms team as well. So
Hmm.
although I'd sort of, dabbled in internal comms, I'd sort of always worked very closely with internal comms colleagues. I'd not that was my sort of first step into that side of things.
Hmm.
And they
Hmm.
had a great team. We were just chatting. We've kind of
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know
connections
Lindsay Beaton,
now.
who's now retired, but yeah, kind of great lady. Yeah.
Um, and yes, that was great. And I think it sort of worked for lots of reasons for the company. But I think what was really great was being able to sort of start to think about that integration piece, just in terms of, I suppose, not full
Hmm.
integration, because obviously you've got specialists doing different things, but just that sort of alignment, and really thinking about, everything's become, because with social media, everything's just so blurred, the lines are blurred, people are getting
Hmm.
their information from all over the place.
Hmm.
Colleagues, employees will be looking sometimes more at external sources to kind of, get info about the company, and make their views, come up with their sort of opinions, than, sometimes more than
Yes.
internal. So yeah, that was interesting and great. And then I was there when COVID hit, and that's, I think a lot of companies found that focus really suddenly shifted
Oh God,
not
yeah.
on the
Yeah,
internal
yeah.
side. And people thought, oh my goodness, we really need to pay attention to this. So obviously a horrendous, terrible thing that was happening, but I guess it really sort of put internal comms as a profession, I think, sort of really front and center, and gave them the opportunity to kind of, do their stuff and show their value.
Yeah, so I'm going to guess this, but were you pretty much the first and last call of the CEO's day for a few months when it first kicked off?
Yeah, it was. We had I'm trying to think what it was actually called, a sort of it should be embedded in my brain, a sort of strategic response team that had representatives from across the business, and it was run by our COO, but it was sort of, and you had technology and HR and, and comms had that at that table very much. And yeah, it was daily calls. So it was quite intense.
Yeah. And I guess, also particularly being in the sector you're in, you've not only got safety and well-being of your colleagues, but naturally being within the risk management and insurance space. Something like COVID comes along, and of course we've all seen over the last few years, there have been lots of debates, lots of legal cases, etc., with lots of insurers, who's responsible, who's paying out, who isn't. So on top of the well-being of staff as well, that must have been even on the external communications front, must also have been really full on, and obviously not something that most people are used to either. So learning curve for quite a lot of businesses as well, right?
You're spot on there, actually, Max. And I mean, in a sense, though, actually, when you're in that sector, from an external comms perspective, when bad things happen, you're often somehow involved or pulled in, because media wants to know who's the broker, what's the involvement, what's the chance of payouts being made, what's how mitigated. There's so many. So in that sense, I suppose COVID was another thing, but clearly much, just so much bigger, widespread, and then impacting the company in the way that you just described as well, in terms of just operationally the same as for everyone. So it was certainly interesting times.
And then you moved on from Aon, and it's a couple of years at Dun and Bradstreet. So tell us about that.
So Dun, obviously a really established, I seem to have a thing for US companies, so another really established brand in the data and analytics space, and sort of, I think, nearly kind of up to 200 years. So it was a new role that I stepped into, and it was taking responsibility for all of the markets outside of North America. So it was just a real opportunity to start to build something. There were some great people already in place, and then I was lucky in that I was able to recruit a few more in, and we just built a really good sort of small but nimble team there, and looking across internal and external comms, so sort of taking that integrated approach, and worked really closely with marketing colleagues, actually. So I did actually report into the CMO there, but who had a comms background, which was really great. So I think it really sort of showed you how that can work well in terms of sort of that alignment, and thinking about what are the really big ticket themes and campaigns that we want to work on, and what does everybody bring to the table. So that was good in that sense. Interesting.
Nice. Great. And now obviously you recently set up Dawn Communications. Here's your elevator pitch. Tell us all about it.
Yes, thank you. I just I had got to the point where I just thought I really fancy a change. And actually, in all honesty, at the time when I made that decision earlier this year, I wasn't really sure what that change would be or what it would look like. And I did actually think I'd be contracting, having used contractors myself in the past. I thought, I just was really seeking variety. And then actually, as the months, sort of a couple of months passed, and the more I thought about it, I just really surprised myself by thinking I would actually really like to do my own thing and work directly with clients. And I genuinely was quite shocked by that that sort of realization, because, I was kind of always one to say I'll never go back agency side, I'm in-house. That's me for good. But I suppose, it's very different setting up on your own. It's not the equivalent of a sort of full-on full-service PR agency. That's definitely not what I am. I have I've really sort of narrowed it down, because it sort of was a real process of thinking, because the thing is, I've done a lot, but that doesn't really help people to say, oh, I can do 50 things. It's just overwhelming and really unclear. So I've really sort of worked through it and thought, what is the thing that actually would really help people? And for me, it's that whole sort of the strategy, the planning. For me, that is the foundation of everything that you do. And I think if we're really
Yes.
honest with ourselves, a lot of in-house people, and I've had really positive experiences where it's gone really well, and then I've had less positive, where it's not been as good as it could be. And I just think if you don't have that nailed down, you're not set up for success. You'll be busy and you'll be kind of off fighting fires and doing things for people, whoever's shouting the loudest or being the most difficult, because you just want to hate them and have them go away because,
Yes.
that's legacy. Oh, well, we've always done that, so we'll just keep doing it. I sort of realized, that is something that I think people could really, not everybody, but definitely some people could really do with some help with. And I think especially, as you've mentioned, budgets are tight, teams aren't massive, they never are in-house and in the biggest companies. So it's about having, just sort of thinking you can bring somebody in to work alongside you, to bring that sort of the expertise and the experience on a short-term basis, but to really help you sort out that strategy and planning piece. And especially if you are, some people are sort of one man or woman bands. I've seen job specs in the last 6 months, and sort of, head of comms, and this is going to be, I know this is going to be having a view on. And then it turns out there's no team. So you're kind of like, oh, okay. Head of comm, head of what? Nothing. It's just literally you. So I think people who are kind of in that position, or maybe who are just very new to, have just stepped up recently,
Yes,
into a new role. It's kind of, I think they're the sort of people that I could really help in terms of their planning, their strategy, just kind of getting things sorted out. They've got a really good foundation to work with and move forward.
No, great. I think, kind of particularly your point for people who may be relatively new into a head of role. No one really ever gets any training in this stuff. It's just, here's a budget, and now tell me how you want to spend it. And for a lot of people, I guess the first couple of times they do it, they're winging it.
Off you go. And I think that's
it.
If you've got good people around you to learn from, that's great. And I think it's so important, because obviously there are loads of great qualifications out there that you can choose to do, and sort of, whilst you're working, and, I've done that myself. But I think so much of it, you build your expertise and your abilities and your skill set in comms, because you get to work, if you're lucky, to work with really good people who are willing to give you the time to teach you. And actually, my video, I did do a little video today. I realized it was World Teachers Day. And it just made me think, it's that kind of, it's people giving that time and being able to help, other people to sort of move along and to kind of build up that skill set. But I think that's for me at the moment, I think the sort of the sweet spot on what I really want to focus on. So helping, and I enjoy it. I've always loved, doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, great. And even for the more experienced people, having a second pair of eyes to look over something and thrash some ideas out. It's amazing how you can get very blinkered if it's just you putting a strategy or plan together. So having someone else to sort of run those ideas by, and some of it may just be a sort of confirmatory nod, and some of it actually needs some work, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think when you're in house, if you've been there a while, you can get, you just don't, you're not really sort of connecting, you're not talking so much to people outside, you just can get, and you're so busy, you just get, like you said, just completely blinkered like this. And I just think I think having someone as well who can just be quite objective, who's not being stressed out by all the politics and all the stuff that goes on internally, can just sort of, like you said, it's the bouncing ideas, it's sanity checking things. It's just having someone, whether it's someone a bit more experienced or just a peer, to sort of go, right, let's get this done, let's get it nailed. So
Yes, smashing. So let's get into the meaty questions everyone always wants to know the answers to. What's been your favourite campaign you've run over your career?
I think it is a campaign, but it was bigger than that. I think it was the JLL Real Views project, which was the sort of brand journalism project that I mentioned that I set up in Asia Pacific, because it really, no one in real estate had done anything like that. So we knew we were up against the competition, because we thought they're definitely going to be looking at it as well. And it took about 6-8 months to get off the ground, and it was a real labor of love. It was totally different, totally new. It was a new way of putting content out there, telling stories. It was a global project, although we were running it from Asia, so we had to sort of get the buy-in from everybody in all the regions globally. And yeah, it was just to get it out and launched, and then everything. So for the campaign perspective, everything that went with that in terms of how we're promoting this.
Yes.
We sort of had organic, but we also had paid. We had some budget to use on the sort of paid social and search side, which was quite, that was for me to get involved in that side of things. So it was just really, it just felt like such an achievement. And it was it was genuinely, at the time, look at it now and think, oh, that's not very different. But at the time, it really was different and new. And we went on to win awards, which was great. And that was something that I still look back and think, guys, I'm quite proud of that, and I really enjoyed it.
Yes, great. And for anyone not familiar with what Real Views is, can you just paint a picture of what 1 week of content would look like?
Yeah, sure. So, and actually I should say they, this is obviously going back quite, 10 years. So it's since been integrated into they've had big changes to their website. So if you go to JLL Real Views, you won't find a website, sadly, but I do have some very old screen grabs. We would be planning out, we'd have sort of content calendars, we'd be looking to have written content, we'd be looking to have video, infographics, slideshows, really trying to mix it up. We had our sort of our buckets of sort of topics and themes, and that in itself, it was such a learning experience as well, because just realizing how much effort needed to go into that. And then making sure that everybody internally knew about it. So you were really, really making sure the content was, obviously not just used once, but like multiple times, getting people to sign up to to subscribe to the newsletter, using the content, kind of thing. So we had quite a hard schedule for ourselves. We were publishing at least once a day.
Wow, yeah, and multi-channel content is what everyone does now, but it's incredibly labor intensive, as you say. You've got so many social media channels now as well, so you have to chop up the content to kind of be able to be the right size and fit, and even things like video content has to be different frame rates for LinkedIn, Twitter. It's just it's enormous, isn't it? So that must have been a great day when it finally launched and all that blood, sweat and tears have gone into it.
Very good day.
Right. And then who's been your favorite CEO to work for in terms of their communications, and why?
I've worked with, there've been so many really great leaders that I've worked with, but if I had to pick one, and she is actually a CEO, I think I'd pick I'm not working there anymore. The CEO of Aon in the UK, a woman called Julie Page, because she was just so in so many ways, she was just such a great leader to work with. She was she was very supportive of communications. I think she could really see the value that we created, both on the internal and external side. But I think at the same time, she was always willing to learn and open to sort of learning more about it. She would always listen. She would challenge if she felt she needed to or didn't agree with something, but always in a very, civilized way. She was just and just very down to earth, and then from her, so meaning from her own sort of perspective, then as a sort of a key spokesperson for us as well, she was just very authentic, genuine, and truly, and actually so passionate about the company. So all that you really want, whether you're talking to internal or external audiences. And I think just that piece around giving the time is just so important, because there's nothing worse than, comms being tacked on at the end as a sort of last minute consideration, and trying to get something done, and there's just not enough time being given for it. That's just so difficult and frustrating.
Lost count of the amount of conversations I've had with your peers where communications is involved at the end of something or the end of the planning process and not at the start. It doesn't matter whether it's external, whether it's internal, whether it's an org change, a redundancy process, big campaign. Yeah, the amount of times communications is brought in as a bit of an afterthought, is infuriating and depressing. But it's great that your experience at Aon was very different, and the authenticity piece as well. I really honed in on that word, because it's great, because you're so right. If someone is naturally authentic, we don't really need that much media training, because it lands well. But that's hard to teach. You either have it or you don't.
And I think, and as well, actually, another word that springs to mind is empathy. I feel like she was very, she always would consider how it was feeling, especially from an internal comms perspective, I suppose, how it would be feeling for employees and colleagues. So, and I think then that really creates that sort of level of interest in, well, what are we saying? How are we crafting them? What are the messages? How are we crafting them? How are we positioning them? That kind of thing. So it makes a huge difference, for sure.
Yeah, fab. Final question. If there was one thing you could change about communications, what is it?
Oh, only one.
Yeah, you've got to choose.
It's a really tough question, because there's just too many things to choose from.
Okay, you can have a couple.
I can have one. I think it would be great for more companies and leaders to see it as really as a strategic function, as a strategic business function. But I do think we have a role to play in that ourselves as practitioners. And I don't know if you feel this, and anyone listening, but I feel like there's so much chat at the moment, especially on LinkedIn, around this kind of thing, and lamenting, we're being asked to do this, and we're always asked to, and things that aren't our job, and we're too senior for. And I get it, because I've been there. I think we all do. But at the same time, I hope that rather than just, it's great to be able to vent frustrations and have a laugh about it as well. Things are ridiculous in our sort of networks. But then I just hope at the same time that we are all taking proactive steps to kind of change those perceptions where they need changing, because if we don't, it's not going to happen.
Yes, I put up a post yesterday, day before. Actually, it was around interview prep. Really doing a research on the company where you're interviewing. Going through annual reports, reading CEO interviews. Getting really deep into the operational side of the business. Because you're right. I do know what you mean. I get it, and I do agree. I think this in the right way. I think, my LinkedIn feed can sometimes be full of, I'd say, more on the internal communication side of things rather than the external of we're delivering this, we're delivering that. Some of the softer communications topics, perhaps some of the more, and how do we say this, societal issues which are being communicated. We're not going to get into a debate as to whether some of those are right or wrong, but fundamentally, if you want more resource and you want more trust and you want to be really at that top table, you've got to really be linking whatever you do from a communications perspective to the underlying objectives of the business. So for most businesses, it's turnover, it's client satisfaction, growth. If you're in a growth phase, whatever, shareholder value, doesn't matter what it is, but whatever those strategic pillars are, that's what you've got to be shouting about. That's what gets the attention of the C-suite, because they're focused on running, the business, right? They've got, they've got so many different functions and strands underneath them that they've got their strategy. They know what they want to achieve. They just want all of those different functions firing back against that.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to get what you want.
And I think that's so right. And what I'd add to that, I think the thing that we've struggled with, certainly back in the day and sort of over the years, was that difficulty in how do we actually show our value? How do we measure it? How do we get tangible metrics? Kind of our gut feeling that, we got some coverage in X in the Wall Street Journal and we know that's great. We just know it's just a feeling I've got, and yes, it is great, but it's like, but what can you? And I think that's really, obviously, as time has passed and everything's become so much more digitalized and just everything's so smart, and now there's so many more ways you can show the value and you can measure things, but it's still hard. I think it still can be hard compared to, say, the way that marketing can look at metrics, and obviously certainly sales.
Yes.
And what you mentioned about sales and marketing being so close, I think that is quite true. So it's kind of working out for you what you can, with your budget available and the tools you've got at your disposal, how can you actually show and prove that value, apart other than some crisis happens, and then funnily enough suddenly leaderships
you come to the rescue.
They do see the value comes, but all those times in between the crisis situations, you want to be able to be consistently banging that drum.
No, and I think on the sort of proactive side, I've thought about this a lot, but I thought, actually, communications leaders perhaps spend more time with the sales team, spend more time with the key accounts team, asked to go on a few client reviews or client meetings, asked to go on a couple of pitches. Don't have to say anything, but you can just introduce yourself and sit there. Just take anything on board. You might get a few wins of, I saw your piece in the FT, or I saw it here, or whatever. But then you just start to get. I know it's not. It's quite a hard metric in terms of hours and manpower and labour to do. But I think little things like that, build that trust. So then, then you do get the accounts team and the sales team coming back into leadership meetings and going, oh, yeah, Madeleine, that kind of campaign you did a couple of weeks ago. Oh, I was just out with X key account, X key client, and they mentioned they read your thing in the thing and they thought it was great. Just little cues like that. Also, I think really obvious things. I thought this as well. The storytelling piece lands so well now, doesn't it? And I think a lot of companies and comms teams are getting quite good at putting together the internal communication story side of things and showing the people side of the business. Great. If a client's willing, like client case studies, client storytelling, client interviews, that sort of thing, because that's a very visual thing to the CEO or to leadership of, okay, our client's been willing to sing our praises very publicly.
Yeah, that's the dream, isn't it? I know how difficult it can be to get clients to agree to doing that. And it gets discussed endlessly, and then it doesn't always come to fruition, which is really frustrating. But then you see, especially when you see really big global brands doing it incredibly well, and you just think, there's the proof that it's sort of possible. So it's just,
I mean, it might even just be Joe. It's probably much easier. I'm just guessing here, but if you ask the CEO when they're next seeing a key client, if the key client wouldn't mind doing a piece, some will say no, some will say yes. But hey,
and people talk about writing it into contracts and things, but I don't feel like that works.
Writing into it doesn't, because then also you don't get authentic stories. Then you get, you're going to start getting legal involved in compliance, and it's not what it's meant to be about, right? And of course, you can get legal and compliance to read over your copy if you've got that authentic story, of course. But yeah, I think when you start getting it contractually involved, it doesn't work, does it? Super. Final thing. Have you got anything that you'd like to plug, or kind of any upcoming events or appearances you're doing?
Gosh, anything to plug? I think really just to sort of follow on from what I was talking about in terms of what I've set up with my business and what I'm offering to clients, really just, to reach out. If the whole sort of strategy planning side is something that you feel could be better, could do with some work, I'd be very happy to have a chat to sort of to work that out, because there's a few different ways we can work together, sort of from kind of quite short and sweet. If you just need someone sort of to bounce ideas off and quickly sanity check, then to sort of a couple of ways of actually working through a program, either over a period of weeks through sessions, or sort of intensive one day. So very happy to chat with people to see how I can help.
Super. Wonderful. And best way to contact you?
Probably via LinkedIn, to be honest.
And I will obviously tag you in this as well, so people can get hold of you that way.
Thank you. Because actually, connect on LinkedIn, and then everything else is there. So that's probably the easiest way.
Super, smashing. Well, Madeleine Little, thank you very much for coming on the Comms Coffee Club podcast. Genuinely really enjoyed that, and some really interesting insights and some great stories. So thank you.
Thank you so much as well. I've really enjoyed it too. So appreciate you inviting me on. Thanks.
No worries. It's a pleasure. See you soon. Thanks.